Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking the story of a guy whose name is practically just a synonym for the word invention. We are, of course, talking about Thomas Edison, but we aren't just going to look at the famous Wizard of Menlo Park today. Instead, we're exploring a deeply complex, incredibly relentless, and honestly, sometimes completely ruthless historical titan. The man who conquered darkness left behind a legacy that is anything but black and white.
Okay, let's dive right into this because Edison's beginnings, they were incredibly rocky. As a sickly infant with a pretty abnormally large head, society completely wrote him off right out of the gate. His father found him exhausting to deal with. His teachers quite literally called him defective and an idiot. And after battling scarlet fever and losing his hearing in a terrifying train accident, which left him partially deaf for the rest of his life, the traditional world just had no place for him. His mother actually had to pull him out of school just to educate him herself.
But we really need to juxtapose those incredibly difficult beginnings with one totally staggering number: 1,093. That's the total number of patents Edison registered over his lifetime. I mean, he went from a partially deaf kid who was whipped in the town square by his own father to the man who quite literally engineered the modern world. So how on earth did he bridge that unbelievable gap?
Section 1. The Curious Troublemaker.
You see, Edison's origins make for this intense underdog story, driven by an absolutely insatiable curiosity that, well, usually led to absolute chaos. He didn't just read about science, he tested it, and often dangerously so. He sat on a neighbor's goose eggs to see if they'd hatch. He burned down his father's barn just to see what a fire would do. He even fed a boy chemical powder, genuinely hoping it would make him float away like a balloon. Eventually, as a teenager, he sneaks this mini chemistry lab onto a moving train's baggage car, which, unsurprisingly, caused another fire. And it was actually on these very trains that an accident caused his permanent partial deafness. Though, interestingly enough, that's a physical struggle he later claimed actually helped him concentrate.
But hanging around those trains also gave him his first massive break. At age 15, Edison risked his own life to snatch a station master's baby right from the path of an oncoming train. As a reward for this heroic act, the station master taught him how to use the telegraph. Now, think of the telegraph as the internet of the 19th century. It was the very first way to send near-instant, long-distance communication using electrical signals. For a kid who was just obsessed with machines, mastering the telegraph was the key that really unlocked his future.
Moving on to Section 2. Building the Idea Factory.
So Edison definitely wasn't an overnight success. In fact, he was kind of a terrible employee. He kept getting fired from his telegraph jobs because he'd much rather tweak the equipment than actually do the work. He even built a machine to send his routine signals automatically just so he could sleep on the job. By age 20, he was completely broke and depressed after a failed electronic voting machine nearly bankrupted him. And after blowing an $800 loan on a failed duplex telegraph, he fled to New York. He was literally starving on the streets, surviving only by tricking a store owner into giving him free tea, which he'd then trade for 5-cent dumplings.
But then came the massive turning point. While sleeping in a dingy cellar on Wall Street, he witnessed a central gold indicator telegraph break down, which immediately sent the financial markets into a panic. Edison looked inside, noticed a tiny, loose spring wedged between two gears, and fixed it instantly. Western Union was so blown away by his subsequent improvements to their stock ticker systems that they offered him the absolutely staggering sum of $40,000. To put that into perspective, that's equivalent to over $1 million today.
Now, with life-changing money in his pocket, he didn't just retire to a beach. He poured every single penny into a New Jersey laboratory, creating the world's very first idea factory. He hired capable assistants and formed what he playfully called his insomnia squad. These guys would stay awake for up to 3 days straight, relentlessly testing ideas. It was essentially the blueprint for the modern tech startup. And this is exactly where his famous quote perfectly summarizes his unscientific, totally brute force work ethic. Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration.
Section 3. Illuminating the World. And this brilliantly illustrates the era of his greatest triumphs, which began with a seemingly impossible goal: the incandescent light bulb. Scientists at the time told him an incandescent light bulb that lasted more than a few minutes was physically impossible. The filament inside had to be 1/100th the thickness of a human hair and withstand extreme heat without melting. So what does Edison do? He just starts trying everything: string, nickel, platinum. He sent agents to the Amazon, the Rocky Mountains, Japan, eventually testing 1,600 random materials from around the globe, including human hair. It was an exhausting, completely unscientific process of trial and error until he finally carbonized a simple cotton thread.
And that little thread?
It held a magical, glowing light for 40 straight hours. Edison and his assistants just stared at it in awe. He quickly improved it to 170 hours using carbonized paper, and culminated this massive victory with a breathtaking New Year's Eve display illuminating Menlo Park with 800 glowing lights for 3,000 stunned onlookers. He had literally caught lightning in a bottle.
Which brings us to Section 4, War of the Currents. But look, inventing the bulb wasn't enough. Edison had to invent the actual power grid to turn it on. To deliver power on a massive scale, he hired a brilliant young Serbian immigrant named Nikola Tesla. And here is where the pivotal conflict begins. Edison had built his entire empire on direct current, or DC. The problem? DC required a power plant every 2 miles. You just couldn't power the world that way. Tesla, a mathematical genius who could literally visualize entire machines working in his mind, knew that alternating current, or AC, was the answer. Because AC alternates voltage, it could be transported over virtually unlimited distances.
But Edison already had millions invested in DC, so he tells Tesla to just focus on fixing his DC motor, promising him a massive $50,000 bonus if he succeeds. Tesla, working tirelessly, fixed it perfectly. But when he went to ask for his money, Edison just laughed it off, telling him the offer was nothing more than an American joke. Insulted and utterly scammed, Tesla quit immediately.
Well, that decision would absolutely haunt Edison. Tesla teamed up with investor George Westinghouse, who saw the limitless potential of AC and offered Tesla an unbelievable deal. We're talking a $2 million flat fee, a $65,000 monthly salary, and staggering estimated royalties of $3.3 billion, all adjusted for inflation, of course. This put Tesla on track to become the richest man alive. Overnight, Tesla became an instant, lethal threat to Edison's DC empire.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the inspiring inventor quickly devolved into a ruthless saboteur. Desperate to protect his wealth and his DC patents, Edison launched this horrific smear campaign to terrify the public about AC power. He published blatant lies in the newspapers. He secretly funded the invention of the electric chair just to associate AC with death. He even sank so low as to pay kids for stray puppies, electrocuting them in public, and famously filmed the public electrocution of an elephant. It was truly brutal stuff.
But despite Edison's brutal tactics, science ultimately won out. Tesla and Westinghouse decisively won the war with the currents by safely and beautifully illuminating the Chicago World's Fair with 160,000 AC light bulbs. They really sealed their victory by building the massive hydroelectric station at Niagara Falls, forever establishing AC as the global standard, which, by the way, is exactly what's powering the device you're using right now.
Section 5. A Complicated Legacy. The ripples these two titans left across modern history are just massive, but how their lives ended literally couldn't get more different. Tesla, the pure idealist, actually tore up his multi-billion-dollar royalty contract to save Westinghouse's company from bankruptcy, and because of this, Tesla lost the ability to fund his future work. He died tragically, completely penniless, writing in his diary that he was in love with a pigeon. Edison, on the other hand, shrewdly and ruthlessly protected his patents and his wealth. His lighting empire was so massive that J.P. Morgan eventually bought into it, consolidating it into the mega corporation we know today as General Electric. But even after losing the War of the Currents, Edison just never stopped working. He took his phonograph and made recorded music affordable for the masses. And incredibly, because of his deafness, he actually had to bite into the wood of the phonograph, feeling the vibrations through his skull just to hear the audio. He also patented the kinetograph, profoundly shaping the motion picture industry. In fact, independent filmmakers literally fled across the country to Los Angeles just to dodge Edison's aggressive patent lawsuits, inadvertently creating Hollywood. He even revolutionized battery technology alongside Henry Ford, continuing to work right up until his death at age 84. So this leaves us with one final fascinating question. Thomas Edison completely changed the world with his 99% perspiration work ethic, pulling himself up from absolute obscurity. But we also know he was a ruthless businessman who lied, scammed, and electrocuted animals to crush a superior technology just to protect his own wallet. So do his monumental contributions to human progress justify his darkest deeds? It's a really complex piece of history to weigh, and it for sure leaves you wanting to look a little closer the next time you flip on a light switch. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring.